The girl's body hit his door like a sack of grain dropped from a wagon. Caleb Dawson heard the sound before he saw her. A thud, then silence, then a scratching, like an animal dragging itself across wood. He opened the door and she fell inward, barefoot, bleeding, dress torn to ribbons down her back. She couldn't have weighed 60 pounds. Her fingers clawed at the floorboards. Her mouth opened. What came out was barely human. "They beat me." 2 words. Then her eyes rolled back and she went limp in his arms. Before we continue this story, I want to ask you a small favor. If you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe to our channel and hit the bell so you never miss one. And drop a comment below telling me which city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's get back to Caleb and this little girl who just changed his life forever. Caleb Dawson had not held another person in 7 years. Had forgotten what it felt like. Had forgotten the weight of someone else's life in his hands. Now he stood in his carpenter's shop in Black Hollow, Wyoming Territory, December 1887, holding a child he did not know, and his whole body had gone stupid with the shock of it. She weighed nothing. He could count her ribs through the torn cotton, could feel her heartbeat, fast and shallow, like a bird trapped in a fist. Her feet were bare and blue-white at the toes. Frostbite. Another hour out there and she would have lost them. He laid her on the workbench, his hands, the right one steady and the left with its 2 crooked fingers that hadn't straightened since the bridge collapse 10 years back, moved on instinct. Checked her breathing, checked her pulse. Found both, thin but there. Then the lamplight caught her face, and Caleb's hands went still. Her left eye was swollen shut. Purple-black bruising spread down her cheek in layers that said this was not one hit. This was weeks. Her lip had been split and crusted over, then split again on top of the old wound. Marks on her throat. Small marks. The kind made by adult hands, squeezing something they had no right to touch. He turned her gently, saw her back. His breath stopped. Welts, dozens of them, crisscrossing from her shoulders to her waist. Fresh ones, still weeping over half-healed ones, over old scars. Layered like tree rings, counting out months of systematic brutality. And stamped into the worst of them, pressed deep enough to scar permanent, was a pattern he recognized. Braided leather weave. The signature of a horse quirt. One specific quirt with a silver-capped handle that only one man in the territory carried. Caleb's fists clenched so hard his crooked fingers screamed. The girl's good eye opened, found his face. Terror flooded in. She jerked away from him with a sound that wasn't a scream and wasn't a sob. The sound a dog makes after it's been kicked so many times it expects the boot from every direction. Her hands came up, shaking, covering her face. Caleb stepped back, raised both hands where she could see them, palms out, the crooked fingers ugly and obvious in the lamplight. "Easy," he said. His voice came out like rust scraped off iron. "I ain't gonna hurt you." She didn't move, didn't blink. Just watched him from behind her fingers with that one eye. "What's your name?" Nothing. Her throat worked, but no sound came. He waited. Caleb Dawson was good at waiting. 7 years of talking to nobody had made him patient, if nothing else. 7 years since Ruth. Since Abigail. Since the scarlet fever took them both, while he was 40 miles away building a house for another man's family, and didn't make it home until it was 2 days too late. The girl's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Emmy," barely a whisper. Emmy Cole. Cole. The name hit him like a mallet to the chest. Samuel Cole. The biggest horse ranch in the territory, 1,200 acres. A Mustang herd so fine, the U.S. Army sent buyers every spring. Samuel had been Caleb's friend, one of the few who still treated him like a living man after Ruth and Abigail died. Samuel had stood at Caleb's wedding 16 years ago. 5 months back, Samuel fell off his horse on a flat road he'd ridden 10,000 times. Broke his neck. Dead before sundown. Caleb looked at the girl, at the welts, at the quirt marks. "Your folks?" he asked. Emmy held up one finger, pointed at the ground. Down. Gone. Dead. She didn't say the word. Didn't need to. "Your uncle," Caleb said, not a question. Every muscle in Emmy's body locked. Her breathing stopped dead. 3 seconds. 4. Then it came back in short, panicked gasps. She curled into herself on the workbench, knees to chest, arms wrapped tight, making herself as small as possible. The instinct of a creature trying to disappear. She nodded once, fast, desperate. "He do this to you?" Another nod. Her hand went to the workbench edge and gripped it so hard her knuckles went white. Caleb turned away from her, walked to the basin, poured water, found his cleanest rag, which wasn't very clean, came back. "I'm gonna wash those cuts. Gonna touch your back. That all right?" Emmy stared at him, searching. Whatever she found in his face, it was enough. She turned around slowly and let the torn dress fall from her shoulders. Caleb worked in silence, not gentle because he had forgotten gentle. Careful, the way a man handles something he knows he can break. He cleaned the welts one by one, applied salve from a jar he kept for splinter wounds and rope burns. Some cuts had gone bad, red at the edges, infected. She needed a real doctor. Emmy flinched at every touch, every single one. Her body expected pain from every hand that came near it, but she didn't pull away, just sat there, shaking, and letting him work. When he finished, she reached into her dress pocket, pulled out a crumpled paper, held it out to him without a word. Caleb took it, unfolded it, recognized the handwriting immediately. Samuel Cole's neat, careful hand. "Caleb, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. I know we ain't spoken much since you lost Ruth and Abigail. I know you blame yourself. I know you've been drowning in that shop for 7 years. But I need to ask you the hardest thing I've ever asked anyone. Protect my Emmy. Darius has been circling, asking about the horses, about the army contracts, about what happens to the herd if I die. He needs this ranch, Caleb. He's in debt up to his neck in St. Louis. Bad debts. Dangerous men. He told me last week that accidents happen to men who don't see opportunity. The way he said it made my blood go cold. There's a will in my old saddle, 3rd hook in the tack room, tucked in the lining under the seat. It names you as Emmy's guardian, names the ranch as hers until she turns 18. My lawyer, Phineas Ward in Cheyenne, filed it proper with the territorial clerk. Darius don't know about it. You saved my life once at Miller's Crossing. Went into that river when everyone else said it was suicide. Found me pinned under the crossbeam with the water rising over my face. Pulled me free with your bare hands. Carried me 1/2 mile with 2 cracked ribs and that busted left hand. That's who you are. Not the man in the bottle. The man who goes in when everyone else walks away. Save her the way you saved me. And maybe saving her will save you too. Your friend, Samuel. Caleb read it twice, His hands were shaking, not from cold. He looked at Emmy. She sat watching him with that one good eye. Not hoping. Something past hoping. Something that had been hoping for 5 months and had almost given up entirely. Caleb folded the letter, put it in his coat pocket, walked to the workbench, picked up the whiskey bottle, looked at it for a long time. Then he put it down, unopened. He walked to the water pitcher instead, poured a cup, brought it to Emmy. She took it in both hands, drank all of it, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. The gesture was so ordinary, so childlike, so normal in the middle of all this horror that something in Caleb's chest shifted like a timber cracking under weight. He poured her another cup. Outside, hooves. Emmy's cup hit the floor. Water splashed across the boards. She was off the workbench and against the back wall before Caleb could blink, pressing herself flat, making herself invisible, her good eye fixed on the door like death itself was on the other side. Caleb moved to the window. Through the gap in the shutters he saw 2 riders, Marshal Owen Briggs on his dun gelding, badge catching what little light the clouds let through, and beside him, riding stiff and jerky on a tall sorrel, Darius Cole. 44 years old, lean-faced, sharp-eyed, with the restless energy of a man being chased by something he couldn't outrun. His coat was expensive, but worn at the cuffs. His boots were polished, but cracking at the soles. Everything about Darius Cole was a man pretending to be more than he was. At his belt, the quirt with the silver cap hung like a promise. Caleb turned back to Emmy. She had stopped breathing, her whole body rigid, her eye wide and white, with a terror so deep it had no bottom. She shook her head, back and forth, back and forth. The silent no of a child who has run out of words for fear. Caleb looked at her, looked at the door, looked at the letter in his pocket. Then he looked at the whiskey bottle on the workbench. The easy way out. Don't get involved. Hand her over. Go back to the bottle and the silence and the slow, comfortable dying he'd been doing for 7 years. His hand moved toward the door latch, moved to open it, to give her back, to do the simple thing. Emmy made a sound, not a word, not a cry. Just a small, broken noise in the back of her throat, like something tearing loose from its last anchor. Caleb's hand stopped on the latch. He stood there for 5 heartbeats, maybe 10, the longest seconds of his life since the night he rode home and found Ruth already cold and Abigail already in the ground. Then he pulled his coat off the peg, shrugged into it. The weight settled across his shoulders. He stepped outside, pulled the door shut behind him, put his body between Emmy and everything that was coming. The 2 riders stopped 20 yards out. Briggs dismounted slow. His hand sat on his gun belt, but his jaw was set in the way of a man who'd already made up his mind about something. Darius swung down fast, jerky, the movements of a man who couldn't hold still, because holding still meant thinking. And thinking meant counting the debts that were eating him alive. He walked forward through the cold, forcing a stride that was supposed to look confident, but missed by a full yard. "Dawson!" Darius's voice came out tight, controlled. But underneath it, Caleb heard the tremor, the desperation of a man standing on the edge of a cliff and pretending the ground was solid. "I believe you got my niece in there." Caleb said nothing. His right hand hung loose at his side. His left hand, the broken one, rested against the doorframe behind him, blocking it. "Marshal Briggs can confirm I got legal guardianship. Papers signed by Judge Horace Plimpton. All proper. All legal." Darius pulled a folded document from his coat. His hand was steady. His eyes were not. They kept jumping past Caleb to the window, to the shutters, to the thin line of lamplight leaking through. Briggs took the papers, read them, nodded slowly. "Papers are in order," Briggs said. "Guardian appointment, filed, signed, notarized." "Now, Dawson," Darius said, and here his voice shifted into something rehearsed, something he'd practiced in front of a mirror. "The girl's troubled, headstrong, makes up stories. You know how children get when they ain't got proper guidance." "I know how those welts got on her back," Caleb said. Darius blinked. His hand dropped to the quirt at his belt. Touched the silver cap. Let go. Touched it again. A man reaching for a weapon out of habit. "Discipline," Darius said. "A guardian's right." "With a quirt. I don't know what she told you, but she didn't tell me nothin'." Caleb's voice dropped flat. Cold. "She didn't have to. I got eyes. I got the marks to look at. Braided leather, silver cap pattern, same quirt hanging on your belt right now." Darius's face twitched. His fingers closed around the quirt handle, then let go, then closed again. He glanced at Briggs. Briggs was watching the quirt too. "This is family business, Dawson. Private family business between a man and his ward." "Let me see her," Caleb said. "Let me hear her say she wants to go back." "She's 8 years old. She doesn't know what she wants." "Seems to me she knows exactly what she don't want." Darius stepped closer. Close enough that Caleb could smell the whiskey on his breath. Cheap stuff, not the kind a man drinks for pleasure, but the kind he drinks to stop his hands from shaking. "Listen to me carefully." Darius's voice dropped low, just between them. "That ranch has 1,200 acres and a Mustang herd worth more than this whole town put together. The Army contract alone pays $15,000 a year. You think I'm going to let a drunk carpenter and a lying child stand between me and that?" "I think you already killed your own brother for it," Caleb said quietly. The air between them went solid. Darius's face changed. The performance fell away. What was underneath was cold and cornered and something close to animal. His hand went to his coat pocket. Caleb's hand went to the chisel tucked in his belt. "Enough!" Briggs stepped forward, put himself between them. His hand was on his gun now, not resting, gripping. "Both of you, stand down." He looked at Caleb, something hard in his eyes. Not sympathy, not yet. "Caleb, I'm going to be straight with you. I've known you 15 years. I built my grandkid's cradle on your workbench. But I've also watched you drink yourself hollow since Ruth passed. I've watched you talk to nobody for 7 years and stare at walls and forget to eat." He paused. A man that deep in grief, sometimes he sees things that ain't there. Sometimes he finds a cause because he needs one, not because it's real. "You think I put those welts on her myself?" "I think I don't know what to think. I think I got legal papers on one side and an accusation on the other, and I need more than one man's word to go against a judge's signature." "Then look at her back." "I intend to, but not tonight. Not like this." Briggs straightened. "I'll give you 10 days. Territorial statute, Section 42. Custody dispute provision. 10 days to get a lawyer, to get a doctor's report, to build a case if you got one." Darius wheeled on him. 10 days? You're giving this drunk 10 days to— "I'm giving the law 10 days to work," Briggs said flatly. "You don't like it? Take it up with the statute book. Section 42, paragraph 6. I didn't write it. I just enforce it." "This is outrageous. I'll have your badge. I'll go to Judge Plimpton and—" "You do that." Briggs mounted his horse, looked down at both of them. 10 days, Caleb. On day 11, if you ain't got something solid, I come back with deputies and I do my job. That ain't a threat. That's arithmetic." He rode off without looking back. Darius stood there. The cold gathered on his shoulders. His breath came in sharp white puffs. The quirt at his belt swayed in the wind. He stared at Caleb with the flat, desperate eyes of a man who had just watched his last good option start to slip. "Samuel thought he could say no to me," Darius said softly. "Thought being decent counted for something. Thought having friends in town made him untouchable." He paused, let the wind fill the silence. "You know what happened to his wagon on that flat road? You know wheels don't just come off by themselves? Think about that tonight, while you're playing hero." "Get off my property," Caleb said. "You don't have property, Dawson. You got a shop the bank's taking in 3 days, and a bottle you can't put down. You ain't a guardian. You're a ruin." Darius smiled, the first real expression he'd shown all night. "Enjoy your 10 days. They're the last free ones you'll have." He mounted up, rode into the darkness. The sound of hooves faded until there was nothing left but wind and cold and the blood pounding in Caleb's ears. He stood on the porch until his hands stopped shaking. Took him a long time, longer than it should have. Then he went inside. Emmy hadn't moved from the wall, pressed flat against it, both hands behind her, palms against the wood, like she was trying to push through it and disappear. Her eye tracked him as he came through the door. Caleb closed it, barred it, turned to face her. She watched him, waiting for the verdict, waiting to find out if she was safe or if the door was about to open again and the man with the quirt was going to drag her back to the place where every night ended the same way. "You're staying," Caleb said. Emmy's knees buckled. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, small and shaking. Her torn dress pooled around her. She didn't cry. She was past crying. She just sat there and breathed, and for the first time since she'd fallen through his door, the breathing started to slow down. Caleb pulled a blanket from the shelf, old wool, rough, smelling of sawdust and neglect. He crossed the room slowly, knelt down, held it out to her the way you'd hold food out to a stray dog. No sudden moves, no expectations. Emmy looked at the blanket, looked at him, reached out with one small bruised hand and took it, pulled it around her shoulders, held it tight. "Thank you." Her voice was so small it barely stirred the air. "Don't thank me yet," Caleb said. "We got 10 days, and I got $9, and I ain't had a clear thought in 7 years. The odds ain't exactly in our favor." Emmy pulled the blanket tighter, drew her knees up, rested her chin on them. That one good eye still watching him. "Papa said you'd help," she whispered. 4 words, simple, the way a child says things. Not eloquent, not profound, just true. Caleb sat down on the floor across from her, his back against the workbench, his long legs stretched out. The two of them sitting there in the lamplight, separated by 6 feet of sawdust-covered floor and 7 years of grief and whatever fragile, terrifying thing had just begun between them. "Your papa's saddle," Caleb said. "The old one in the tack room. 3rd hook from the door." Emmy nodded. "There's a will inside it. Names me as your guardian. Makes the ranch yours." Another nod. She knew. "Your uncle's got guards at the ranch?" Emmy held up 2 fingers. "When do they switch off?" She thought about it, held up one hand, moved it in an arc across an imaginary sky. Sunset. Then held up one finger. One guard. Caleb almost smiled. Almost. The muscles had forgotten how, but they twitched in the right direction. "You're pretty smart for a kid who ain't saying much." Emmy's mouth moved. Not quite a smile, either, but close. The ghost of something that might have been one before 5 months of court marks beat it out of her. She pointed at the whiskey bottle on the workbench, then pointed at Caleb, then shook her head slowly, side to side. The message was clear. Don't drink. I need you sober. Yeah, Caleb said quietly. I know. He stood, walked to the workbench, picked up the whiskey bottle, carried it to the back door, opened the door, poured it out into the snow, every last drop. The brown liquid steamed in the cold air and disappeared into white ground. He came back inside, set the empty bottle on the shelf where it could watch him and remind him what he'd chosen. You can sleep in the back room, he said. Got a cot, clean blanket, door locks from inside. Emmy stood, the blanket still wrapped around her like armor. She shuffled toward the back room, stopped in the doorway, turned around. She pointed at Caleb, touched her own chest, then held up both hands, all 10 fingers spread wide. 10 days. Caleb nodded. 10 days. Emmy disappeared into the back room. He heard the lock turn from inside, heard the cot creak as she lay down, heard her breathing go from fast to slow, to the deep, even rhythm of a child who had found, for the first time in 5 months, a door between her and the man with the quirt. Caleb sat down at his workbench, spread Samuel's letter flat under the lamp, read it again. The words blurred. His eyes burned with something he hadn't felt in 7 years. He looked at the empty whiskey bottle on the shelf. At the door to the back room, where an 8-year-old girl with whip marks on her back was sleeping because she believed he could save her. At his own hands, scarred and rough and shaking. The 2 crooked fingers on the left curled inward, like they were trying to hold on to something that wasn't there anymore. Ruth. Abigail. 7 years of failing to save the people who mattered. Now a dead man's letter asking him to try again. $9 in his pocket. A shop the bank was taking in 3 days. A town that thought he was a drunk. A territorial marshal who half believed he was imagining things. And somewhere in the darkness, Darius Cole counting down 10 days until he could finish what he started. The odds were impossible. But then again, so was pulling a man from under a collapsed bridge with 2 cracked ribs and a hand that would never work right again. So was surviving 7 years with a hole in your chest where your family used to be. Caleb looked toward the back room one more time. Listened to Emmy's breathing. Steady now. Trusting. He had 10 days to earn that trust. 10 days to find a will, find a lawyer, stand against a man who had already killed once for that ranch, and would kill again without blinking. 10 days to become someone worth believing in. Caleb pulled Samuel's letter close, smoothed the creases with his broken hand. And for the first time in 2,555 days, he started to plan. Morning came and Caleb hadn't slept. He sat at the workbench where he'd been sitting all night, Samuel's letter folded in his coat pocket, the empty whiskey bottle still on the shelf, watching him like a dare. His back ached. His neck was stiff. His mouth tasted like old nails. The lock on the back room door clicked. Emmy came out slow, moving like every step had a price. She stood in the doorway, with the wool blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, and looked at Caleb with her one good eye. Checking. Making sure he was still there. Making sure the door was still barred. Making sure last night was real. "Morning," Caleb said. Emmy nodded, didn't speak. Her eye went to the empty whiskey bottle on the shelf, then back to him. She pointed at it, raised her eyebrows. "Still empty," Caleb said. "Still gonna be empty tomorrow." Something shifted in her face. Not a smile, not yet. but the faintest loosening of muscles that had been clenched tight for 5 months. Caleb put water on the stove, found his last tin of coffee, made it strong enough to wake the dead, which was roughly how he felt. He poured 2 cups, set one in front of Emmy. She looked at it, looked at him. "I ain't your mama," Caleb said. "You want coffee? Drink coffee." Emmy picked up the cup in both hands, sipped. Her face scrunched. She sipped again, kept drinking. "We need to get you to a doctor," Caleb said. "Some of those cuts are going bad. You need proper medicine." Emmy's cup froze halfway to her mouth. Her eye went wide. She shook her head fast, back and forth. The terror came flooding back like a dam breaking. "Doc Crane ain't like your uncle," Caleb said. "Known him 30 years. Served in the war together. He's patched me up more times than I can count, and never once asked me to pay." Emmy shook her head again. Her hand was trembling so hard the coffee sloshed over the rim. "He'll tell," she whispered. First words of the morning, small and raw. "He won't." "Everyone tells Uncle Darius." "Everyone's scared of him." "Hosea Crane ain't scared of nothing. Man cut off soldiers' legs in a field hospital with cannonballs landing 50 yards away. Your uncle don't even register on his list of concerns." Emmy stared at him, weighing it. 8 years old and already an expert at calculating risk, because every wrong calculation for 5 months had meant more welts on her back. She nodded once, barely. There was a knock at the door. Emmy dropped the cup. It shattered on the floor. She was against the wall before the pieces stopped spinning, flat and rigid, both hands behind her, the blanket fallen around her feet. "Easy," Caleb said. He moved to the window, looked through the shutter gap. A man stood outside, 64 years old, gray-haired, gray-bearded, carrying a black medical bag. His coat was buttoned wrong and his hat sat crooked, like he dressed in the dark and hadn't bothered to check. Doc Hosea Crane. Caleb opened the door. Crane stepped in, stamping snow from his boots, already talking. "Brady's boy came to my house at dawn," Crane said. He set his bag on the workbench with the ease of a man who'd done it 10,000 times. "Marshal Briggs sent him. Said you had Tom Bennett's girl here. Said she might need looking at." "Samuel Cole's girl," Caleb corrected. "Right, Cole. I'm 64, Caleb. The names get mixed up, but the medicine don't." Crane turned and saw Emmy pressed against the wall. His face changed. Not shock. Doc Crane didn't do shock anymore. Something colder, something professional turning personal. "Come here, child," he said. His voice went quiet, gentle in a way that Caleb had forgotten Crane could be. "Let me see." Emmy didn't move. Her eye went to Caleb. "He's safe," Caleb said. Emmy looked at Crane, at his bag, at his hands. Then she peeled herself off the wall and shuffled forward, each step a negotiation between trust and every instinct telling her to run. Crane knelt down, slowly, no sudden movements. He held out his hand, palm up, the same way Caleb had held out the blanket last night, an offering, not a demand. "I ain't gonna do nothing without asking first," Crane said. "And if I do something that hurts, you tell me to stop, and I stop. Deal?" Emmy looked at his hand, reached out, touched it with one finger, like testing whether a stove was hot. Crane waited. Emmy put her hand in his, small fingers against his weathered palm. He closed his hand around hers gently, and something in his jaw tightened hard enough that Caleb could see the muscle jump. "Can I see your back, Emmy?" She turned, pulled the dress down from her shoulders. Crane was silent for a long time. He examined each welt with fingers that had been steady for 30 years of frontier medicine. Cleaned the infected ones with antiseptic that made Emmy hiss through her teeth. Applied fresh bandages. Checked her ribs, Her face, her hands, her frostbitten toes. The whole time, Emmy watched Caleb. Not Crane. Caleb. Like Caleb was the fixed point in a spinning room, and if she kept her eye on him, she wouldn't fall. "No broken bones," Crane said finally. "But the infections are serious. 2 of these cuts need cleaning twice a day with carbolic acid. She needs salt baths, clean bandages, and she needs to eat. When's the last time you had a real meal, child?" Emmy held up 3 fingers. 3 hours? She shook her head. 3 days. Crane's mouth became a thin line. He turned to Caleb, kept his voice low, but Emmy heard everything. Children who'd been hurt always heard everything. "Those welts are consistent with a braided leather quirt. Silver cap imprint on 3 of the deeper wounds. I've seen Darius Cole's quirt up close. Custom work, distinctive pattern." He pulled out a notepad, started writing. "I'm documenting everything, measurements, patterns, degree of healing. This is a medical report, Caleb. It holds up in court." "You know what you're doing," Caleb said, "standing against Darius Cole with your name on paper." "I know exactly what I'm doing," Crane capped his pen. "I've been watching that man for 2 years, watching people around him have accidents, watching their land end up in his pocket." He looked at Caleb with eyes that had seen too much to flinch. "Samuel Cole didn't fall off that horse. We both know it. I examined the body. The break pattern on his neck was wrong for a fall, consistent with a blow from behind, blunt force. I put it in my report. Sheriff at the time filed it under accidental." "Why didn't you push it?" Crane was quiet, a long quiet, the kind that holds shame. "Because I was taking morphine for my back," he said. "Had been since the war. And Darius knew it. Made it clear that if I pushed, he'd make sure everyone else knew it too. A doctor addicted to morphine doesn't keep his practice long." He paused. "So I kept quiet, and a little girl got beaten for 5 months because I was protecting myself." He looked at Emmy. She was watching him now, had heard every word. "I'm sorry," Crane said to her. Not the way adults usually say sorry to children, quick and meaningless. Slow, heavy, like he meant it down to the marrow. Emmy looked at him for a long time. Then she reached out and patted his hand twice. A gesture so small and so generous that Crane had to look away and blink hard several times. "I'll come back tomorrow," Crane said, gathering his bag. "Change those bandages. Check the infections." He stopped at the door. "You need to move fast, Caleb. Darius is already working the town, telling people you're unstable, dangerous, that you're projecting your grief onto this child. By tomorrow, half of Black Hollow will believe him. Let them. It ain't about belief. It's about the mob he'll put together when belief turns to action. I've seen it before. Decent people doing ugly things because a man with money told them it was righteous." Crane opened the door. Cold rushed in. "Get that will. Find a lawyer. Make it legal before Darius makes it bloody." The door closed behind him. Caleb barred it again. Emmy stood in the middle of the room, the blanket back around her shoulders, bandages white against her dark skin where the dress had torn. She looked at Caleb and pointed to herself, then pointed at the door Crane had left through, then made a gesture Caleb couldn't read. "What?" he asked. Emmy tried to speak, swallowed, tried again. "He cried," she whispered. "The doctor. He cried when he saw my back. Nobody cried before." Caleb didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know what kind of world made a child surprised that an adult would cry at her pain. So he said nothing, just stood there and let the silence hold what words couldn't. Another knock, this one louder, confident. Caleb checked the window. A woman stood outside, tall and straight-backed, carrying a basket covered with a cloth in one hand and dragging a boy by the collar with the other. The boy was maybe 12, gangly, with a face full of freckles and an expression of total mortification at being dragged anywhere by his mother. Nettie Hargrove owned the dress shop and laundry on Main Street. Widow. Her husband Ernest had died 2 years back in what was ruled an accident at the lumber yard that Darius Cole happened to own. Fell from a ladder the day after refusing to sell his land. Caleb opened the door. Nettie walked in like she owned the place. Set the basket on the workbench. Pulled the cloth off. Bread, cheese, dried apples, jerky, a jar of honey, a jar of preserves, thick wool socks, a dress, dark blue, patched but clean, a pair of boots, small, worn soft. "Doc Crane stopped by my shop on his way home," Nettie said. She didn't waste words, never had. "Said you had Samuel Cole's girl here, and she needed feeding and clothing. So here I am." She turned to Emmy. Her face, which was hard and practical and built for surviving in a world that didn't make it easy, went soft, in a way Caleb had never seen from her. "Lord, child," Nettie said quietly. "Look at you." Emmy pressed back toward the wall, but not as far as before, not as fast. She was watching the boy. The boy was watching her back. "That's Willie," Nettie said. "He's 12 and useless, but he's kind." "Ma," Willie said, mortified. "Hush." Nettie knelt down to Emmy's level. "I knew your mama, sweetheart, Virginia Cole. She came to my shop every month from mending. Always brought me honey from your bees. Always had a kind word." She paused. "You look just like her." Emmy's good eye glistened. Her lip trembled. But she didn't cry. Hadn't cried once since she'd arrived. Caleb wondered if she'd forgotten how, or if she'd learned that crying made it worse. Willie stepped forward. He moved differently from the adults. No caution. No careful gestures. Just a 12-year-old boy who saw a hurt kid and did what 12-year-old boys do. "You want an apple?" he said. Pulled one from the basket, red and shiny. Held it out. Emmy looked at the apple. Looked at Willie. Looked at the apple again. She took it. Bit into it. Juice ran down her chin. "I'm Willie," the boy said. "I got a dog named Biscuit. He's brown and dumb, and he'll lick your face till you can't breathe. You can meet him if you want." Emmy chewed the apple. Swallowed. And then she did something she hadn't done since she'd fallen through Caleb's door. She spoke. Not to Caleb. Not to the doctor. To the boy. "What kind of dog?" 3 words. Ordinary. The kind of words a child says to another child about a dog. But to Caleb, standing there watching, those 3 words sounded like a lock opening. "Some kind of hound mix," Willie said. "Ears too big for his head. Trips over him when he runs." He grinned. "He's real good at finding food that ain't his." "I had a cat," Emmy said. Quiet, careful, like she was testing whether it was safe to remember things that hurt. "Papa got him for me. Orange. Named him Copper." "What happened to him?" Emmy's face closed. She took another bite of apple. Didn't answer. Willie, to his credit, didn't push. Just sat down on the floor next to her and started telling her about the time Biscuit ate an entire pie off the windowsill and threw up on the preacher's boots during Sunday service. Emmy listened. Her shoulders dropped half an inch. Her grip on the apple loosened from desperate to normal. She was still watching the door, still tracking every sound, but something in her had shifted. The presence of another child, someone who didn't need anything from her, who wasn't trying to help or heal or save, who just wanted to talk about a dog, had done something that all the adults in the room couldn't do. It had made her feel like a kid again, for 30 seconds at a time. Nettie pulled Caleb aside, kept her voice low.
"You know what you're up against."
"I know."
"Darius Cole has been buying this town for 2 years. Owns the lumber mill, Got the bank manager owing him favors. Got 3 men on his payroll who ain't cowhands and ain't afraid to use their fists."
She paused.
"My Ernest found that out."
"I'm sorry about Ernest."
"Don't be sorry. Be smart."
Nettie's eyes were hard and clear.
"I watched my husband fall off a ladder he'd climbed 1,000 times. I found boot prints on that platform that didn't match his boots. I saw Darius Cole at the funeral, looking like a man who'd just closed a good deal."
She paused.
"I kept my mouth shut because I had a boy to raise and no husband to protect us. I ain't proud of it."
"You're here now."
"I'm here now because if I don't help that child, I'll be just like the rest of this town."
Scared and quiet and hoping the monster eats somebody else first. She straightened. "What do you need?" "I need somebody to stay with Emmy while I'm gone." "Gone where?" "The ranch. Tonight. There's a will hidden in Samuel's old saddle. It names me as Emmy's guardian. Without it, Darius's papers stand, and she goes back." "You're going to break into a guarded ranch." "I'm going to get what belongs to her." Nettie looked at him for a long moment, measuring, the way a woman who'd survived the worst measures a man to see if he's worth trusting.
"I'll stay with her," Nettie said. "I got a shotgun. Know how to use it. Ernest made sure of that before he died, like he knew somehow I'd need it."
"Can Willie stay too?" They both looked at the 2 children. Willie was still talking, something about Biscuit chasing a chicken through the church. Emmy was still listening. Her apple was down to the core. She was holding it in her lap, like something precious. "He's the only one she's talking to," Caleb said quietly. Nettie's face did something complicated. Pride and sorrow, and something fierce that mothers carry in them like loaded weapons.
"He can stay."
Caleb spent the rest of the day preparing. Went through his tools. Selected the small pry bar, wire cutters, his darkest coat. Counted his money. $9. Not enough for a lawyer. Not enough for anything, except maybe 3 more days of food. The letter from the bank still sat on the workbench. $175. 2 days left. Caleb looked at it and felt nothing. The shop didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered except keeping Emmy safe and honoring a dead man's trust. Around noon, Willie convinced Emmy to eat properly. Not by asking, not by offering, by sitting down and eating himself, loudly and enthusiastically, making noises about how good the bread was, how the cheese was the best thing he'd ever tasted, how the jerky was so tough it was like chewing boot leather, but in a good way. Emmy watched him eat for 2 full minutes. Then she reached for the bread, tore a piece off, chewed it slowly, then faster. Then she was eating like a child who hadn't had a real meal in a week, which she hadn't, tearing into the food with both hands while Willie grinned and passed her more. Caleb watched from across the room. Something in his chest kept shifting, kept cracking, kept letting in light he hadn't felt in 7 years. It hurt. It all hurt. Caring hurt. But watching Emmy eat bread with both hands while a 12-year-old boy told her about his dumb dog hurt in a way that was almost good. By late afternoon, Emmy had changed into the dress Nettie brought. Dark blue. Clean. It was slightly too big, but Nettie pinned it quick with hands that knew fabric the way Caleb's knew wood. The boots fit close enough. The wool socks made Emmy close her eyes when she pulled them on, like the feeling of warm feet was something she'd forgotten existed. She still hadn't cried, still flinched at sudden sounds, still pressed herself against the wall when the wind rattled the shutters. But she was talking now, small sentences, mostly to Willie, mostly about animals, safe subjects, subjects that didn't have quirt marks in them. As the sun started going down, Caleb pulled on his dark coat, checked the pry bar, the wire cutters, the knife on his belt. Emmy was watching him. She pointed at the door, then pointed at herself, made a walking gesture with 2 fingers. "No," Caleb said. Emmy's jaw set. For the first time, something other than fear crossed her face. Stubbornness. The kind that lived in her bones, inherited from a father who'd said no to a dangerous man and paid for it with his life. She pointed at herself again, then held up 3 fingers and pointed at an imaginary wall. 3rd hook. She knew where the saddle was, knew the ranch layout, knew where the guards stood and when they changed. Caleb would be searching blind without her. He hated it. Hated that she was right. "I know the barn," Emmy whispered. It was the most words she'd said at once all day. "I know where Copper hides. I know which boards creak. I know everything." "It's dangerous." Emmy looked at him, pulled the collar of her dress aside, showed him the edge of a welt that disappeared below the fabric. She didn't say anything. Didn't need to. Dangerous was where she'd been living for 5 months. Dangerous was what she'd escaped. Going back to get the one thing that could keep her free was not dangerous. It was necessary. "Stay close," Caleb said. "Stay quiet. I tell you to run, you run." Emmy nodded. No argument, no hesitation, just the nod of a child who understood exactly what was at stake. Nettie loaded her shotgun. 2 shells. Snapped it shut with a sound that meant business. "You bring her back safe," Nettie said, "or don't come back at all." "Yes, ma'am." Willie stood next to his mother, tried to look brave. Mostly succeeded. "If Biscuit was here," Willie said to Emmy, "he'd go with you. He's real brave. Except around thunder." Emmy looked at Willie, that ghost of a smile again. Closer to real this time. "I'll be okay," she said. The first time she'd said anything about the future since she'd fallen through Caleb's door. The first time she'd put herself in a sentence that pointed forward instead of back. Caleb and Emmy left as full dark settled over Black Hollow. The moon hid behind clouds. Good. Less light meant less chance of being seen. They moved on foot, leading Caleb's horse, keeping to the tree line. The Bennett Ranch sat 15 miles north. A long walk in the cold. A long walk for an 8-year-old with welts on her back and boots that were slightly too big. Emmy didn't complain, didn't slow down. Walked beside Caleb with her chin up and her hands buried in the 2 long sleeves of her blue dress, breathing steady, watching the darkness the way a hunted animal watches everything. Caleb watched her from the corner of his eye. 8 years old, walking into the place where she'd been beaten for 5 months to save herself. Walking beside a man she'd known for less than a day because her dead father's letter said he could be trusted. The bravest person Caleb had ever known was 4 feet tall and weighed less than a wet saddle. They walked in silence. The only sounds were boots on frozen ground, the horses breathing, and the wind moving through the pines like something alive and restless. After 2 hours, Emmy reached up and took Caleb's hand. His right hand, the good one. Her fingers were cold, even through the wool mittens Nettie had tucked into the basket. She didn't say anything, just held on. Caleb's throat tightened. The last small hand that had held his belonged to Abigail, 6 years old, reaching up for her papa as he left for a job 40 miles away. "Hold my hand, Papa, just for a minute." He had let go too soon, had been in a hurry, had ridden away while she stood in the doorway waving. He hadn't held anyone's hand since. Now Emmy Cole's fingers wrapped around his palm, and the grief hit him so hard he nearly stopped walking. Nearly sat down in the snow and let it bury him. But he didn't, because the hand holding his was alive and warm and trusting, and the girl attached to it needed him to keep moving. So Caleb Dawson kept moving, 1 foot in front of the other, into the darkness, toward the ranch where a will was hidden, and a dead man's last wish was waiting. His crooked fingers curled around Emmy's hand and held on tight. They reached the coal ranch after 4 hours. Emmy tugged Caleb's hand and pointed. Through the trees, lights burned in the main house windows. The barn stood dark and silent, 200 yards to the left. One figure leaned against the barn door, the orange glow of a cigarette marking his position like a signal fire. Emmy held up one finger, then pointed at the cigarette glow. "That's Virgil," she whispered, closest to speaking volume she'd been all night. "He's the mean one, but he don't move from that door. Too cold, too lazy." "The other guard?" Emmy made a riding gesture. "Gone." She pointed toward town and held up fingers. "Wouldn't be back for hours." Caleb tied his horse to a pine 50 yards back. Checked the pry bar in his belt, the knife on the other side. Looked at Emmy. "Show me the back way in." Emmy moved through the darkness like she'd been born to it. She knew every fence post, every frozen rut, every patch of ground that would crunch under a boot, and every patch that wouldn't. She led Caleb in a wide circle around the barn, approaching from the rear where Virgil's cigarette glow was just a faint smudge of orange on the far side. The barn had a small rear door, hay door, waist height. Emmy pointed at it, then made a twisting gesture. Locked. Caleb pulled the pry bar, worked it into the gap between door and frame. Slow. Careful. The wood was old and cold and wanted to scream when pressure hit it. He eased the bar deeper, found the latch on the inside, applied steady force. The latch gave with a pop that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Both of them froze. Emmy pressed flat against the barn wall. Caleb held his breath. Footsteps on the other side. Virgil coming around to investigate. Caleb pushed Emmy through the hay door, followed her in, pulled the door shut behind them just as a lantern light swept across the back wall. Inside, darkness. The smell of hay and horses and leather and something else. Something that made Emmy's whole body go rigid. Caleb felt it. The specific smell of a place where bad things had happened. Where a child had been hurt. Where the air itself held memory. Emmy grabbed his sleeve, pulled him sideways, down behind a stall wall. Her hand was shaking, but her movements were precise. She knew this barn the way a prisoner knows their cell. Virgil's boots crunched around the corner. The lantern light came through the gaps in the barn boards, casting stripes across the hay-covered floor. Caleb could see him now through the slats. Young, 25 maybe, gun on his hip, worn low like he thought it made him something. Lantern in one hand, the other scratching the back of his neck. "Damn wind," Virgil muttered. He kicked at the rear door, checked the latch, grunted. Started to turn away. Emmy's boot caught a bucket. The sound rang through the barn like a bell in a canyon. Virgil spun. The lantern swung. His hand dropped to his gun. "Who's there?" Caleb moved. Didn't think. Just moved the way he'd moved at Miller's Crossing when the bridge was coming apart and Samuel was drowning. Fast and stupid and committed. 4 strides across the barn floor. His right fist connected with Virgil's jaw before the man's fingers touched the gun grip. Virgil went down. The lantern flew. Caleb caught it with his left hand, the crooked fingers screaming at the sudden grip, but he held it. Kept the flame from hitting the hay. Set it down careful on a post. Virgil was out, breathing, but done. "Rope," Caleb said. Emmy was already moving. She went to the tack room wall, pulled a coil of rope off a hook, brought it back. Her hands were shaking, but her face was set, determined. They tied Virgil's hands and feet, gagged him with his own bandana. dragged him into an empty stall, and covered him with hay. By the time he woke up, they'd be long gone. Emmy took Caleb's hand and led him to the tack room. Third hook from the door, just like Samuel's letter said. The saddle hung there in the lantern light, old brown leather, cracked and worn soft with years of use. The first saddle Samuel Cole ever owned. Caleb lifted it down, ran his hands over the underside of the seat. His fingers found it, a seam, almost invisible. He worked his knife blade into the stitching. The leather parted, and inside, tucked flat against the frame, was a folded document. He pulled it out, hand shaking, unfolded it under the lamp. Last Will and Testament of Samuel Edward Cole. The words were formal, legal, a lawyer's precise handwriting. Caleb scanned the pages, his eyes catching the words that mattered. Section 4. Guardianship of minor child. In the event of our deaths, I hereby appoint Caleb James Dawson of Black Hollow, Wyoming Territory, as legal guardian of my daughter Emmeline Rose Cole. All property, assets, livestock, and contracts associated with the Cole Ranch to be held in trust for Emmeline until she reaches the age of 18, with Caleb Dawson serving as executor. Dated March 8, 1887. Witnessed and notarized by Phineas Ward, Attorney at Law, Cheyenne. Filed with the Territorial Clerk, April 1, 1887. 5 months before Darius's guardianship papers. 5 months before Samuel fell off a horse on a flat road. Caleb looked at Emmy. She stood beside him, her good eye wide, both hands pressed together in front of her chest, like she was praying or trying to hold herself in one piece. "Is it there?" she whispered. "It's here. It's real. It's legal." Emmy's face crumpled, not into tears, into something deeper. Relief so powerful it took her legs out from under her. She sat down hard on the tack room floor and put her face in her hands and shook. Caleb knelt beside her. Didn't touch her, just knelt there and waited until the shaking slowed. "There's more," Emmy said. She lifted her face, reached into the inside pocket of her dress, the one Nettie had sewn in that afternoon, pulled out a small leather-bound book no bigger than her palm. The cover was water-stained and worn. "I took this from Papa's desk the night I ran. Didn't know what it was." Caleb took the book, opened it. Samuel Cole's handwriting. Neat, methodical. Dated entries going back 2 years. June 1886. Darius asked about the Mustang contracts again. 3rd time in 2 months. Offered $5,000. When I refused, he said men who don't see opportunity coming often see tragedy instead. November 1886. Henderson's barn burned. 3 separate points of origin. Fire doesn't start in 3 places by accident. Darius bought the land at auction. Paid half what it was worth. February 1887. Ernest Hargrove fell off a platform at the lumber mill. Day after, he refused to sell his property to Darius. Saw the tool marks on the ladder rungs myself. Someone filed them halfway through. Caleb turned pages, entry after entry. A map of murder drawn in careful ink. August 1887. Darius came to the house today. Didn't bother pretending. Said I had one last chance to sell the herd and the contracts. Said if I didn't, he'd make sure Emmy was well taken care of after. The way he said after made me want to lock every door and never sleep again. The last entry, 3 days before Samuel died. September 15th, 1887. If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident. Darius needs this ranch to pay his debts in St. Louis. Men are coming for him. Bad men. The kind who break legs when loans go unpaid. He's desperate. And desperate men do desperate things. I've written everything down. Every threat. Every death. Every pattern. Caleb Dawson is the only man I trust with this. God forgive me for putting this on him. The journal shook in Caleb's hands. Does it help? Emmy asked quietly. Caleb looked at her. At this child whose father had spent his last months documenting his own murder because he knew it was coming and couldn't stop it. Your papa was a brave man, Caleb said. His voice cracked on the words. I know, Emmy said. Simple. Sure. The way a child states a fact about the sky being blue. He was scared, but he wrote it all down anyway. Outside, the sound of hooves. Distant but closing. Caleb shoved the will into his coat, the journal into his shirt, grabbed Emmy's arm. Back door, now. They ran. Through the barn, past Virgil's stall where muffled grunting said he was waking up, through the hay door into the night air. Behind them, a voice shouted. The second guard, back early. Someone's in the barn! Virgil! Virgil, you in there? They hit the tree line running. Caleb lifted Emmy onto the horse, swung up behind her, kicked hard. The horse lunged forward into the darkness. 2 gunshots cracked behind them, close enough that Caleb heard the bullets cutting air. He leaned over Emmy, shielding her with his body, and rode. They rode hard for an hour, then another. The horse was blowing and foaming, but Caleb didn't slow down until the lights of Black Hollow appeared through the trees. He didn't breathe right until they were back at the shop, back behind a barred door, with a Will safe and Emmy safe, and his heart hammering hard enough to crack ribs. Nettie was waiting on the porch with a shotgun across her lap and murder in her eyes. "About time," she said. "I was fixin' to come find you." "We got it," Caleb said. "Good. Now get inside before somebody sees you." Willie was asleep on the floor by the stove, Biscuit curled up against him. The dog, a brown hound mix with ears too big for his head, raised his head when Emmy came in. His tail started wagging. Emmy knelt down. Biscuit licked her face. Once, twice, 3 times. Emmy wrapped her arms around the dog's neck and pressed her face into his fur and didn't let go for a long time. Willie woke up, looked at Emmy hugging his dog, looked at Caleb and Nettie, went back to sleep like this was all perfectly normal. Caleb spread the will on the workbench, the journal beside it, read them both again under the lamp while Nettie looked over his shoulder. "This is real," Nettie said quietly. "This is proof." "It's proof if we can get it to the right people. Darius has Judge Plimpton in his pocket. If we go through normal channels, Plimpton will find some way to throw it out." "Then go over his head." "Territorial governor. Emergency petition for child welfare. But we need a lawyer to file it." Caleb tapped the will. "Phineas Ward, Cheyenne. He drew up this will, filed it with the clerk. He's our witness that it's legitimate." "Cheyenne's 80 miles. "I know." "In December." "I know that too." Nettie looked at him, hard. The way she looked at fabric before she cut it, measuring twice. "You're going to ride 80 miles in winter to find a lawyer who might not even be there anymore?" Samuel's letter said, if Phineas didn't contact me after his death, assume Darius got to him. Caleb paused. "It's been 5 months, no contact, which means Darius either scared him off or worse." "And if it's worse?" "Then we find another way, but I have to try. That will needs a lawyer behind it, or it's just paper." "When?" "Dawn. Can't waste another day. Darius is working the town. Crane said 2, maybe 3 days before he's got enough people stirred up to come here by force." Emmy had fallen asleep on the floor next to Biscuit, the dog's big head resting on her lap, her hand still tangled in his fur. She looked small. She looked like what she was, an 8-year-old child who should have been worrying about arithmetic and kittens and whether her shoes were too tight, not about lawyers and wills and the man who murdered her father coming to drag her back. "I'll watch her," Nettie said. "Me and Willie and the shotgun. Nobody comes through that door without losing something important." "I believe you." "You better. Because if you don't come back, Caleb Dawson, if you ride off into the snow and get yourself killed and leave that child alone again, I will find you in the afterlife, and I will make you sorry." "Yes, ma'am." Caleb slept 2 hours, woke before dawn. The shop was cold, the stove burned down to ash. He built the fire up, put coffee on, moved quiet so as not to wake Emmy. She was already awake, sitting up on the floor with Biscuit beside her, watching him. "You're going," she said, not a question. "Cheyenne, to find the lawyer who wrote your papa's will." "How long?" 2 days if the weather holds, 3 if it don't." Emmy stood, walked to the workbench, picked up the empty whiskey bottle, held it up where he could see it, set it back down. "I know," Caleb said. "I know." Promise. One word. The first time she'd demanded anything from him. Not asked, not whispered. Demanded. Her one good eye locked on his face, with an intensity that had no business living in an 8-year-old. "I promise," Caleb said. "Not a drop." "And promise you'll come back." Caleb looked at her, at this child who had already lost everyone and was watching one more person walk out the door. "I promise I'll come back." "Papa promised he'd come back too." The words hit Caleb like a fist to the chest. He knelt down, put himself at her level, looked her in the eye. "I ain't your papa, Emmy. I can't be. But I'm telling you right now, on your papa's memory, and on my Ruth and my Abigail, I will come back through that door. You hear me?" Emmy searched his face. Whatever she found there, it was enough. She nodded once. Then she did something she hadn't done before. She stepped forward and put her arms around his neck. Held on. Tight. Her face pressed against his shoulder, her small body trembling. Caleb froze. His arms hung at his sides. He hadn't been hugged in 7 years. Hadn't been touched with anything resembling affection since Ruth. His body had forgotten the mechanics of it. His heart had forgotten the meaning. Then his arms came up, slowly, like machinery rusted from disuse being forced back into motion. He put them around Emmy, carefully, gently, the way he should have held Abigail, one more time before he rode away for a job 40 miles distant. Emmy held on for 10 seconds, 15. Then she let go, stepped back, wiped her face with her sleeve. Not crying. Close, but not quite. "Be fast," she said. "Yes, ma'am." Caleb rode out as dawn cracked the eastern sky. 80 miles to Cheyenne. 16 hours if he pushed hard and the snow held off. His back already ached. His crooked fingers throbbed in the cold. He was 57 years old and felt 70, and was riding into a winter that didn't care about his age or his pain or his promises. Behind him, Black Hollow was waking up, and somewhere in that town, Darius Cole was counting days and making plans, and getting closer to the moment when patience would run out and violence would take its place. Caleb kicked his horse faster. The ride to Cheyenne nearly killed him. 18 hours through mountain passes choked with snow, through valleys where the wind cut through his coat like it wasn't there. Through darkness so thick, he trusted the horse to find trail that his eyes couldn't see. He stopped once, 2 hours past midnight, built a small fire behind some rocks, ate jerky that tasted like leather, drank water from his canteen because the coffee was gone, and whiskey was a promise he'd made to a child with one good eye. His hands shook, not from cold, from want. 7 years of whiskey every night, and now nothing, and his body was screaming for it in ways that made his teeth ache and his vision swim. He looked at his hands in the firelight, the crooked fingers, the scars, hands that had built 100 buildings and saved a man from drowning and held a dying wife and buried a daughter. Hands that were shaking because they wanted a bottle. "Not today," Caleb said to the fire. "Not tomorrow. Not ever again." The fire didn't answer, but the shaking eased. A little. He reached Cheyenne late the next afternoon, the territorial capital. Bigger than Black Hollow by 10 times. Brick buildings, paved roads, people who wore suits and carried briefcases and lived lives that had nothing to do with courts and orphans and wills hidden in saddles. Caleb found Phineas Ward's office on Cary Avenue, a small building between a bank and a dry goods store. The sign on the door said Phineas Ward, attorney at law. The windows were dark. The door was locked. Caleb knocked. Nothing. Knocked harder. Nothing. He tried the building next door. The dry goods owner, a heavy man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers, looked at him with suspicion. "Ward? Ain't seen him in 2 months. Closed up shop one day. Left no forwarding address." The man leaned closer. "Had some rough-looking fellas come around asking for him, though. Twice. The kind of fellas you don't want asking for you." "You know where he lives?" "Used to board at the Plainsman Hotel on Ferguson Street. Room 12. Whether he's still there, I couldn't tell you." Caleb found the Plainsman Hotel, a worn building with peeling paint and a clerk who looked like he hadn't smiled since the war. "Phineas Ward," Caleb said. "Room 12. "Room 12's occupied." The clerk didn't look up from his ledger. "Man in there don't want visitors. Paid through the end of the month. Said he was sick." "He ain't sick. He's scared." The clerk looked up then, studied Caleb's face. The trail dust, the exhaustion, the look in his eyes that said, this wasn't casual. "You a friend?" "I'm the man he's been hiding from helping." The clerk chewed on that for a moment. Then he slid a key across the counter. "Room 12, end of the hall. You break anything, you pay for it." Caleb climbed the stairs, found room 12, knocked. "Go away." The voice inside was thin, tired. The voice of a man who'd been sitting in a room alone for 2 months, waiting for something terrible to either happen or stop threatening to. "Mr. Ward, my name is Caleb Dawson. Samuel Cole sent me." Silence. A long silence. Then the sound of a chair scraping. Footsteps. The lock turning. The door opened 2 inches. One eye peered through the gap. Phineas Ward was 58 years old. Looked 70. Gray-haired, gaunt, wearing a suit that had been slept in for what looked like weeks. His eyes were red-rimmed and jumping. The eyes of a man who checked corners and flinched at footsteps. "Samuel's dead," Ward said. "I know. His daughter's alive. Barely. Darius Cole's been beating her for 5 months with a horse quirt." Ward's face went gray. He opened the door another inch. "You're the carpenter. The one from the will." "I'm the one from the will, and I got the will in my coat, and a journal full of evidence that Darius Cole murdered his brother and at least 3 other people for their land. What I don't got is a lawyer willing to stand up in front of the territorial governor and make it count." Ward's hand gripped the doorframe. His knuckles went white. "They came to my office," Ward said. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Two men, 3 weeks after Samuel died. Said if I pursued the matter, I'd have an accident. Same kind Samuel had. Same kind that seems to happen to everyone who gets in Darius Cole's way." He swallowed. "I closed my office, came here, been sitting in this room telling myself I was being smart, being safe." "You were being scared." "Yes." Ward didn't flinch from it, didn't make excuses, just said it flat and true. "I was scared. I'm still scared." "Good. Scared means you understand what's at stake." Caleb pulled the will from his coat, held it up. "This is the will you wrote, the one you filed with the territorial clerk. It names me as Emmy's guardian. It puts the ranch in trust for her. It's legal and proper, and it makes everything Darius has done since September a crime." Ward stared at the document, his eyes glistening. "I also got Samuel's journal," Caleb continued. 2 years of entries documenting every threat Darius made, every suspicious death, every acre of land that changed hands after somebody had a convenient accident. Names, dates, patterns. Enough to hang him if the right people see it. "The governor," Ward said quietly. "Emergency petition. Child welfare. Doc Crane's got a medical report on Emmy's injuries. I got sworn statements. All I need is a lawyer who'll file it and stand behind it." Ward looked at the will, at Caleb, at the will again. "I failed Samuel," Ward said. His voice cracked. "I failed that little girl for 5 months. I sat in this room and told myself there was nothing I could do, and I knew it was a lie every single day. You can stop failing her right now." Ward was quiet for a long time. Caleb could see the war in him, the fear pulling one direction, the shame pulling the other, the weight of 5 months of cowardice sitting on his shoulders like a yoke. Then Phineas Ward straightened. Not much, but enough. He opened the door all the way. "The territorial clerk's office closes at 6, Ward said. "It's 4:30. We have 90 minutes. "Then let's move." They moved. Ward changed his shirt, grabbed his satchel, the one with his legal papers and notary seal, and the tools of a profession he'd abandoned out of fear. They hit the street at a near run, 2 men with no time to waste, and a child's life hanging on whether they could reach a clerk's desk before a clock struck 6. The territorial clerk's office sat on the 2nd floor of the Capitol building. A harried young man in spectacles was already closing cabinets when Ward pushed through the door. "We're closing. Come back tomorrow." "Emergency petition, child welfare, territorial statute, section 17. Ward's voice had changed. The fear was still there, but something harder had moved in front of it. Professional. Authoritative. The voice of a man who knew the law and had decided, after 5 months of hiding, to use it. "You're required to accept emergency filings until 6 o'clock. It's 5:42. The clerk looked at Ward, at Caleb, at the documents Ward was pulling from his satchel, with hands that shook but did not stop. 18 minutes, the clerk said. "That's all you get." Ward filed everything. The will, the medical report Crane had written, Caleb's sworn statement, Emmy's account as recorded by Caleb, the journal entries transcribed and referenced, the petition for emergency review of guardianship. The clerk stamped each page, filed them, issued receipts. "Emergency petitions are reviewed within 72 hours, the clerk said. "You'll be notified by telegraph." Outside, the sun was going down. Caleb stood on the Capitol steps and breathed air that tasted like the first clean breath he'd taken in 7 years. 3 days, he said. "We hold Emmy safe for 3 more days." 7 days left on the marshal's deadline, Ward said. "If the ruling comes through, we're legal. If it doesn't, Darius gets her back, and you go to prison." Then it better come through. Ward looked at him, tired, scared, but standing. I'm coming back with you, Ward said, to Black Hollow. I ran once. I'm not running again. It could get dangerous. It's been dangerous for 5 months. I just wasn't brave enough to be part of it. Ward picked up his satchel. I brought 2 horses. We leave at dawn. But Caleb wasn't waiting for dawn. There was a telegram waiting at the hotel when they got back. He opened it with hands that had stopped shaking somewhere between the clerk's office and the front desk. Emmy, in danger. Darius came with 8 men. Nettie held them off. Emmy safe, but he's coming back. Hurry. Doc Crane. Caleb was on his horse in 10 minutes. Ward tried to argue, said they should wait, plan, be strategic. Caleb didn't hear a word. Emmy was in danger. That was all there was. That was all there had ever been since a barefoot girl fell through his door and whispered 2 words that cracked his dead heart open. They rode through the night, 80 miles of darkness and cold and fear. Caleb's body screamed, his back, his hands, his crooked fingers locked around the reins like claws. But he rode, because he'd made a promise to a child who'd already lost everyone, and Caleb Dawson was a man who kept his promises, even when they hurt, especially when they hurt. They reached Black Hollow 16 hours later. The horses were half dead. Caleb was barely conscious in the saddle. His back had locked up somewhere around the halfway mark and hadn't unlocked since. His crooked fingers have gone numb around the reins. His eyes burned. His lungs burned. Everything burned. But he was here. The shop was still standing. Nettie sat on the porch with a shotgun across her lap, same as before, like she hadn't moved in 2 days. Her face was drawn. Her eyes were hard. There was a fresh dent in the doorframe that hadn't been there when Caleb left. Buckshot pattern. She'd fired at least once. "About damn time," Nettie said. "Emmy?" "Inside. Scared, but whole." Nettie stood, looked at Phineas Ward climbing off his horse behind Caleb. "Who's this?" "The lawyer." Nettie looked Ward up and down. The wrinkled suit, the shaking hands, the face of a man who hadn't slept properly in 2 months. "He any good?" "He filed a petition. That's what matters." "It better be, because Darius Cole came here last night with 8 men and a torch and told me he was going to burn this shop to the ground with the girl inside if I didn't hand her over." Caleb's blood went cold. "What happened?" "I put a shotgun barrel through the window and told him the first man through the door would leave in a box. He backed off. But he'll be back. He's done waiting, Caleb. Whatever's left of his patience died last night." Caleb pushed through the door. Emmy was sitting on the floor against the back wall with Biscuit pressed against her side and Willie sitting next to her, his arm touching hers, not holding her, just being there. The boy had dark circles under his eyes. He hadn't slept either. Emmy looked up when Caleb came through the door. Her face went through something that had no name. Relief and fear and hope and the desperate calculation of a child who'd learned to measure every return against the possibility that this time the person wouldn't come back. She stood, walked to him, stopped 2 feet away, looked at his face. "You promised," she said. "I'm here." "You look terrible." "Feel worse, but I'm here." Emmy nodded. The tension in her shoulders dropped 1 degree. She looked past him to Ward, standing in the doorway with his satchel, and her good eye narrowed. "That's the lawyer?" "That's the lawyer." "He's scared." "Everybody's scared, Emmy. What matters is he came anyway." Ward stepped inside, looked at Emmy, at the bruises still yellowing on her face, at the bandages visible through the collar of her dress. Something in his expression broke apart, and rearranged itself into something harder. "Miss Cole," Ward said. "I'm Phineas Ward. I wrote your father's will. I filed it with the territorial clerk, and I should have been here 5 months ago instead of hiding in a hotel room feeling sorry for myself." He knelt down to her level. "I'm sorry. I can't fix that. But I can tell you that as of yesterday afternoon, your father's will is filed as an emergency petition with the territorial governor's office. In 72 hours, maybe less, you'll have a legal ruling that puts you exactly where your father wanted you, safe, with Mr. Dawson, and your uncle won't be able to touch you." Emmy looked at him the way she looked at everyone, measuring, weighing, calculating whether the words matched the person saying them. "Papa trusted you," she said quietly. "He did. Don't make him wrong." Ward blinked, swallowed, nodded. Doc Crane arrived within the hour, changed Emmy's bandages, checked the infections. They were better. Not healed, but better. The salt baths Nettie had been giving her twice a day were working.
"How long until we hear from the governor?" Crane asked, washing his hands.
72 hours from yesterday, Ward said. "Could be sooner. The clerk flagged it priority based on the medical evidence."
"We might not have 72 hours, Nettie said from the window. She hadn't put the shotgun down since Caleb arrived. "Darius has been in the saloon all morning, buying drinks, telling stories. Same thing he did before he came here with the torch."
"What kind of stories?" Caleb asked.
"The kind where you're a dangerous drunk who kidnapped a child. The kind where Emmy's a liar who makes up tales for attention. The kind where he's just a concerned uncle trying to do right by his dead brother's girl, and the whole town's being fooled by a broken-down carpenter with a grudge."
Nettie's jaw tightened.
"He's good at it. People believe what they want to believe, especially when the man telling them is buying the whiskey."
"How many does he have?"
"Last count, 15, maybe 20.
Some are his hired men. The rest are just townspeople, scared, confused, looking for somebody to tell them what to do." She paused. "He told them the 10 days are up, said Marshal Briggs has no choice but to arrest you and return Emmy by force if you don't surrender her. The 10 days aren't up until tomorrow. Since when do facts matter to a mob?" Caleb looked at Ward. "Can we do anything legally before the governor's ruling comes?" "I can file a temporary restraining order with the local court, but that means going through Judge Plimpton, and Plimpton is Darius's man. He'll deny it. Then we hold. We hold until the ruling comes."
"And if the mob comes first?"
Caleb didn't answer that, because there was no good answer. 6 people in a carpenter's shop against 20 men whipped into righteous fury by a desperate liar with free whiskey. The math was simple, and the math was bad. "I'll stay," Crane said. "Whatever happens, I'm here. My medical report is filed. My testimony is on record. If they want to take that girl, they go through me."
"And me,"
Nettie said. She chambered around. The sound was final.
"Ma,"
Willie said from the floor. His voice was thin but steady.
"I'm staying too."
"You're 12.
"I'm staying too."
Nettie looked at her son. Something moved across her face. Pride and terror and the specific agony of a mother watching her child become brave at exactly the moment she wished he wouldn't.
"Lord help us all,"
she said quietly. They spent the afternoon preparing, barred the windows, reinforced the door. Caleb checked his revolver, the old one from the war. 6 bullets. He counted them twice. Hoped he wouldn't need any. Knew he probably would. Emmy sat in the corner with Biscuit and Willie. She was quiet. Had been quiet since Caleb came back. Watching everything. Processing everything. The gears turning behind that one good eye in ways that no 8-year-old should need to think.
"Mr. Dawson," she said.
"Yeah, if they come. If there's too many." She paused. Chose her words with the terrible care of a child who'd learned that words had weight.
Don't let him take me back alive."
The room went silent. Caleb crossed the floor, knelt in front of her, took both her hands in his, the right one steady, the left with its crooked fingers curving around her small palm. "Listen to me," he said. His voice was rough and low and shaking with something that was not fear. "Nobody is taking you anywhere. Not tonight, not ever. You hear me? I walked into a river to save your papa when the water was over his head and the bridge was coming apart. I rode 160 miles in 3 days on no sleep and no whiskey because I made you a promise. I ain't stopping now. Not for Darius, not for 20 men, not for anything." Emmy's eye searched his face.
"What if you can't stop them?"
"Then I'll die in this doorway, and they'll have to step over my body to reach you."
And even then, Nettie's got that shotgun, and Doc Crane's meaner than he looks, and your papa's will is filed with the territorial governor, and there ain't a damn thing Darius Cole can do to unfile it. The law is coming, Emmy. We just have to hold until it gets here. Emmy squeezed his hands, hard, harder than a child her size should have been able to squeeze. Then she let go. "Okay," she said. Small, quiet, but settled, like something inside her had found a floor to stand on. The mob came at sunset. Caleb saw them through the window. 23 men by his count, carrying torches and rifles, and the self-righteous anger that comes from being told you're on the right side by a man buying your drinks. They filled the street in front of the shop, spreading out in a half circle, their torchlight throwing shadows that jumped and twisted against the buildings. Darius Cole stood at the front, his long coat buttoned tight, the quirt at his belt. His face was flushed, either from cold or from the whiskey he'd been using to purchase loyalty all day. Behind him, his 3 hired men, the muscle, armed and positioned and ready. And behind them, Marshal Owen Briggs, badge on his chest, gun on his hip, face like a man walking to his own hanging. Caleb checked the revolver one last time. 6 bullets. "Stay inside," he told Emmy. "All of you, no matter what happens." He stepped onto the porch. The crowd noise died. 23 men stared at one man standing in a doorway with an old revolver and nothing else between them. "Dawson!" Darius's voice carried across the yard, louder than it needed to be, playing to the audience. "Your time's up. Marshal Briggs has a warrant. You hand over the girl right now, or these men will take her. Your choice." Caleb said nothing, just stood there, hands at his sides, eyes on Darius. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," Darius continued. "You're a carpenter, Dawson, not a gunfighter, not a hero. You're a drunk who can't pay his bills and hasn't talked to another human being in 7 years. You think you can stand against all of us?" "I can stand against you," Caleb said quietly. "That's enough." Darius's jaw tightened. He turned to Briggs. "Marshal, do your duty." Briggs stepped forward. His hand was on his gun. His face was tight. But his eyes were looking at Caleb with something that wasn't hostility. "Caleb," Briggs said, "the 10 days are up tomorrow, but Mr. Cole has filed a complaint of imminent danger to the child. Under territorial statute, that gives me authority to execute the custody order early." He paused. "I've got a warrant. I don't want to use it, but I will." "You examined those papers Darius showed you," Caleb said. "Did you look at the date?" "The date?" His guardianship petition was filed October 3rd, 2 weeks after Samuel Cole died. Caleb kept his voice steady, loud enough for the crowd. "Samuel Cole's will was filed April 1st, 5 months before. Filed legally, notarized, with the territorial clerk's office. Names me as Emmy's guardian,
names the ranch as hers. Murmur through the crowd. That's a lie, Darius said sharply. There is no other will. There is, and it's filed. Emergency petition with the territorial governor. Should have a ruling by tomorrow. He's stalling, Darius said to the crowd. Making up stories, forging documents. This is what desperate men do. This is what drunks do when they need a cause to justify their miserable existence. Then let's wait, Caleb said. One more day. If the governor rules in your favor, I'll hand her over myself. Walk her right out this door. No argument. And if he doesn't, then you're going to prison for what you did to that child. Darius's composure slipped. Just a crack, but the crowd saw it. Several men shifted their weight, lowered their torches an inch. Marshal, Darius said tightly. Execute the warrant. Briggs stood still. His eyes went from Caleb to Darius to the crowd and back. One day, Briggs said slowly, if there's really a petition with the governor, I can verify it by telegraph tonight. If it's real, we wait. If it's not, I execute the warrant tomorrow morning. That's not what I'm paying you for, Darius snapped. The words hung in the air. Briggs turned to Darius, slowly. What did you say? Darius caught himself, but too late. The crowd had heard it. Paying. Not asking, not requesting. Paying. I misspoke, Darius said quickly. I meant... You said what you meant, Caleb said, loud enough for every man in the street. You've been paying for everything. Paying for Judge Plimpton, paying for guardianship papers, paying for silence, paying for the men who threatened Samuel's lawyer, paying for whatever happened to Samuel on that flat road. That's slander. Is it? Doc Crane stepped out onto the porch behind Caleb, his medical bag in one hand, his report in the other. Because I examined Samuel Cole's body, the break pattern on his neck wasn't consistent with a fall from a horse. It was consistent with a blow from behind. Blunt force. I filed that in my report. Somebody made sure it got buried. The crowd shifted again. The murmur grew louder. And I examined his daughter, Crane continued. 47 welts across her back. 7 infected. 3 bearing the imprint of a silver-capped braided quirt. The same quirt hanging on your belt right now, Mr. Cole. He held up the report. It's documented, measured, photographed, filed with the territorial clerk as of 3 days ago. The girl is lying. She's been coached. Welts don't lie, Crane said flatly. And they don't need coaching. A man in the crowd spoke up. Henderson, whose barn had burned 3 years back. My barn burned with 3 separate origin points. Sheriff said accidental. But fire don't start in 3 places by itself. And Darius Cole bought my land at auction for half price 2 weeks later. Another voice, a woman, Margaret Hargrove, Nettie's sister-in-law. My brother Ernest fell off a ladder at the lumber mill, Darius's lumber mill, the day after he refused to sell his land. I saw the ladder rungs. Someone had filed them thin. More voices, one after another, a pattern breaking open after years of silence. Convenient accidents, suspicious deaths, land changing hands. And at the center of every story, Darius Cole. Darius was losing the crowd. Caleb could see it in the way men stepped back from him, the way torches lowered, the way eyes that had been angry were now uncertain, ashamed, beginning to understand that the man who'd been buying their drinks had been buying their blindness too. These are lies, Darius said. His voice was rising, losing its shape. All of you are being manipulated by a drunk and a coward lawyer, and a drug-addicted doctor who... Enough! The voice came from the doorway behind Caleb, small, quiet, but somehow cutting through every other sound like a blade through cloth. Emmy stood in the doorway. Caleb turned. "Emmy, I told you to stay inside." She walked past him, onto the porch, past Crane, down the steps, into the torchlight. 8 years old, barefoot again because the boots were by the stove where she'd left them. The blue dress Nettie had given her, hanging loose on her thin frame. Bandages visible at her collar and wrists. One eye still swollen. The other open and clear, and looking at every single person in that crowd. She didn't speak. She turned around, reached back, took hold of the dress at the collar, and pulled it down. The torchlight caught her back. 47 welts. Crane's count. Crisscrossing from shoulders to waist. Fresh ones still pink, over half-healed ones, over scars that would never go away. The braided quirt pattern stamped into her flesh. The silver cap imprint visible on 3 of the deepest wounds, matching the quirt on Darius Cole's belt perfectly. Not a word. Not a sound. Just a child's ruined back in the torchlight, telling a story that no words could tell better. The crowd went silent, the kind of silence that falls when a room full of people suddenly understands what they've been part of, what their silence allowed, what their fear enabled. The kind of silence that is itself an accusation. A woman in the crowd started crying, then another. A man dropped his torch. It hissed in the snow. Another man set his rifle down on the ground and stepped away from it. Henderson walked forward, past Darius, past the hired men, stopped in front of Emmy. He was a big man, rough-handed, not given to sentiment. He looked at her back for a long time. Then he took off his coat, draped it around her shoulders gently. The gentleness of a man who understood exactly what had been done and exactly how much it had cost.
"I'm sorry, child," Henderson said. His voice cracked. "We should have seen it." Darius looked around at the crowd that was no longer his, at the torches being lowered and dropped, at the rifles being set aside, at the men and women of Black Hollow looking at him with eyes that had finally opened. "This doesn't change anything," Darius said. His voice had gone thin, reedy, the voice of a man watching his last card get swept off the table. "I have legal guardianship. The law is on my side. Those papers are signed by a judge." "A judge you paid," Briggs said quietly. He'd been watching Emmy's back. His face had gone through every color a face could go through and settled on white. "A judge you paid, just like you said you paid me." "I didn't mean—" "I've been a fool," Briggs said. "I looked at those papers, and I took them at face value because that's what lawmen do. We trust the system. But the system's been bought." He looked at Caleb. "I'll verify the petition by telegraph tonight. If it's legitimate, the warrant is void." "It's legitimate," Ward said, stepping out with his satchel. "I filed it myself. Every document stamped and receipted. The will predates the guardianship petition by 5 months. It was never superseded, never revoked, never challenged. Mr. Cole's appointment as guardian is legally void." Darius stood alone. The hired men behind him were shifting, reading the room, calculating whether their pay was worth what was coming. "This is not over," Darius said. But his voice had no weight behind it anymore. No crowd, no authority, no performance to play to. Just a desperate man standing in the cold, with debts closing in and the last door slamming shut. "It's over," Caleb said. Something in Darius's face changed. The last mask fell. What was underneath was not a businessman or a schemer or even a villain. It was an animal in a corner, teeth bared, nothing left to lose. His hand went to his coat. Fast. Faster than a man that desperate should move. Caleb saw the gun clear the coat pocket, saw the barrel come up,
saw where it was pointed. Not at him, past him, at the small figure standing on the steps with Henderson's coat around her shoulders. Caleb didn't think, didn't plan, didn't calculate odds or count bullets or weigh consequences. He threw himself off the porch, hit Emmy, took her to the ground, covered her with his body. Heard the shot, felt the impact tear through his left shoulder like a hot iron being driven through meat. Felt the burn spread outward, felt his arm go dead. The second shot never came. Briggs fired once, hit Darius in the right arm. The gun spun away into the snow. Darius went down screaming, clutching his arm, his face twisted with pain and fury and the wild-eyed disbelief of a man who had always believed his money could stop bullets. The hired men dropped their guns before Briggs even turned toward them, put their hands up. The fight was over. Caleb lay on the frozen ground, with Emmy underneath him and blood soaking through his coat and pain turning his vision white at the edges. He tried to move. His left arm wouldn't respond. The crooked fingers hung limp. "Emmy," he said. "You hurt?"
No.
Her voice was muffled against his chest.
Are you?
"Some.
How much?
Enough." He tried to sit up. Failed. Crane was there in seconds, pressing his hands against the wound, shouting for bandages. "Shoulder," Crane said. "Through and through. Missed the artery. You're going to live, you stubborn fool."
Emmy.
"She's fine, not a scratch."
Darius.
"Briggs has him. Arm wound. He's not going anywhere except to sell." Caleb let his head fall back against the frozen ground. Above him, stars were coming out, cold and distant and indifferent to everything happening below them. But he didn't need the stars to care. He had people who cared. He had Emmy kneeling beside him, her small hand gripping his good hand, her face tear-streaked for the first time since he'd known her. She was crying, finally crying, not from fear, not from pain, from the specific, overwhelming relief of a child who had been saved and couldn't hold the weight of that miracle inside her body anymore.
You jumped in front of a bullet,
she said. Her voice broke on every word.
You jumped in front of a bullet. For me.
Told you, Caleb said. His own voice was fading. I keep my promises.
You're bleeding.
I've had worse.
You have not.
Fair point. Emmy laughed. A small, wet, broken sound that was part sob and part something else. Something that sounded like the beginning of healing. Briggs walked Darius past them in handcuffs. Darius's right arm was bound and bloody. His face was gray. He looked at Caleb on the ground and Emmy kneeling beside him. Looked at the crowd that had turned on him. Looked at the world he'd built, with threats and money and murder collapsing around him like a house with the foundation pulled out. You can't prove anything, Darius said, but his voice was empty, mechanical. The voice of a man reciting lines to a theater that had already closed. We already have, Ward said quietly. Your brother documented everything. Every threat. Every death. Your own hired man will testify about Samuel's wagon once he understands the alternative is hanging alongside you. They took Darius away. The crowd parted for him and closed behind him, and nobody said a word, and the silence was louder than anything that had been said all night. Crane got Caleb inside, onto the workbench, started working on the shoulder. Emmy wouldn't let go of his hand. Crane worked around her, cleaned the wound, packed it, bandaged it tight. No bone damage, Crane said. Bullet went clean through the muscle. You'll have limited use for a month, maybe 2.
After that, might get most of it back.
My left shoulder, Caleb said. The hand that's already broken. God's got a sense of humor. Funny.
Nettie appeared with hot water and clean cloth, and the specific competence of a woman who had been dealing with emergencies since before most of these men could shave. She helped Crane, cleaned up the blood, made coffee, fed everyone who needed feeding. Willie sat next to Emmy on the floor. Biscuit lay across both their laps, tail wagging like nothing had happened. Willie didn't ask questions, didn't need to, just sat there being 12 and present and steady. Around midnight, a telegraph boy came to the door. Caleb was drifting in and out of consciousness on the workbench, but Emmy was wide awake. She took the telegram, unfolded it, looked at the words, looked at Ward. "I can't read all of it," she said. Ward took it, read it. His hands started shaking. "Emergency review complete," Ward said. His voice cracked and broke and rebuilt itself in the space of one sentence. Samuel Cole's will confirmed legitimate. Caleb James Dawson appointed legal guardian of Emmeline Rose Cole. All property and assets of the Cole Ranch placed in trust. Darius Cole's guardianship petition voided. Signed by the territorial governor. Emmy looked at the telegram, then at Caleb, half conscious on the workbench, with a hole in his shoulder and blood still seeping through the bandages. "Mr. Dawson," she said. Caleb opened his eyes, tried to focus. "We won," Emmy whispered. Something moved across Caleb's face. Through the pain and the exhaustion and the blood loss, and the 7 years of grief that had nearly buried him alive. Something that might have been a smile. The first real one in 2,555 days. "Yeah," he said. "We did." Emmy put her head down on the workbench next to his good hand. Biscuit jumped up and curled against her feet. Willie leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. Nettie sat in the chair by the door with the shotgun across her lap, still watching, still guarding, because some habits don't die just because the danger has passed. And Caleb Dawson lay on a workbench in a carpenter shop with a bullet hole in his shoulder and a child's head resting against his hand, and a dead man's promise kept in his pocket. And he breathed, just breathed. And for the first time in 7 years, breathing felt like enough. Caleb spent 3 days in Doc Crane's office before the old surgeon would let him stand. The shoulder wound was clean. The bullet had gone through without hitting bone. But Crane said blood loss was blood loss, and stubbornness wasn't a substitute for rest. Emmy came every morning, walked from the shop to Crane's office with Biscuit at her heels and Willie 2 steps behind. She brought coffee that Nettie had made and bread she'd sliced herself, and she sat in the chair beside the examination table and didn't leave until Crane told her visiting hours were over, which was a thing Crane invented specifically because Emmy would have sat there all night if he let her. "You don't have to come every day," Caleb said on the second morning. "I know. Crane says I'm fine." "You got shot." "People get shot all the time out here." "Not for me, they don't." Caleb looked at her. The swelling around her eye had gone down to almost nothing. Yellow-green bruising still, but fading. Her face was filling out. 3 days of Nettie's cooking had put color back in her cheeks and weight back on bones that had been too visible for too long. She looked like a kid. For the first time since she'd fallen through his door, she looked like what she actually was. 8 years old. Sitting in a chair with her feet not quite reaching the floor, holding a cup of coffee she was technically too young to drink, with a dog asleep under her chair and a friend waiting outside. "How's Willie?" Caleb asked. "He talks too much." Emmy sipped her coffee. "But he's okay." "You two getting along?" "He showed me how to throw a rope. I showed him where the good fishing holes are on the creek." "He's terrible at fishing." She paused. "He's the first friend I've had since Papa died." Caleb let that sit,
didn't push it. Some things needed air around them. "Marshal Briggs came by the shop this morning," Emmy said. "Talked to Mr. Ward for a long time." "About what?" "Uncle Darius." Her voice didn't shake when she said the name anymore. Not steady either, but not shaking. "They found the man who filed Papa's wheel bolt. He confessed. Said Darius paid him $50 and a job at the ranch." She set the cup down carefully. "Briggs says Darius is going to trial. Real trial.
Territorial court. For Papa and Mama and Ernest Hargrove and the Henderson barn and all of it." "Good. He might hang." Caleb looked at her carefully, trying to read what lived behind those words. "How do you feel about that?" Emmy was quiet for a long time. She reached down and scratched Biscuit behind the ears. The dog's tail thumped against the floor. "I don't feel anything," she said finally. "I thought I would. Thought I'd feel glad or angry or something. But I just feel tired." She looked up at him. "Is that wrong?" "No. That's just what happens when you've been feeling too much for too long. Your insides need a rest, same as your outsides." "Doc Crane said something like that." "Doc Crane's smarter than he looks." "I heard that," Crane said from the other room. Emmy's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close enough that Caleb's chest did that thing again. The cracking, the shifting, the letting in of light through places that had been boarded up for 7 years. On the 4th day, Crane let Caleb go. His left arm was in a sling. The shoulder throbbed with every step. His crooked fingers ached worse than usual. Sympathetic pain from the shoulder wound, Crane said. The whole left side of his body was a mess of old damage and new damage, holding each other up. Ward was waiting outside Crane's office with a folder of documents and the expression of a man who had slept properly for the first time in months. "We need to talk about the ranch," Ward said. They walked to the shop, slowly, Caleb's body protesting every step. Emmy walked beside him, not holding his hand this time, walking on her own, but close enough that her shoulder brushed his good arm every few steps. At the shop, Nettie had laid out food on the workbench, the same workbench where Caleb had treated Emmy's wounds that first night, where he'd read Samuel's letter, where he'd poured whiskey into the snow and chosen a different life. Now it held bread and cheese and ham and a pot of coffee and a jar of honey that Emmy had found in the basket and refused to share with anyone. They sat around the workbench, Caleb, Emmy, Ward, Nettie, Willie, Crane. Biscuit under the table, positioned strategically beneath whoever was most likely to drop food. "The governor's office has confirmed the will in full," Ward said. "Caleb is Emmy's legal guardian. The ranch, the herd, the army contracts, all of it goes into trust until Emmy turns 18. Caleb administers the trust." He opened the folder. "Darius's assets have been frozen pending trial. The territorial court has appointed a receiver to manage his property. Everything he acquired through fraud or coercion is being reviewed." "The families," Nettie said. "Henderson, the others. What happens to their land?" "If the court finds Darius acquired it through criminal means, it reverts to the original owners or their heirs. Henderson could get his property back. Margaret could get Ernest's land back." Ward paused. "It's not guaranteed. Courts are slow. But the evidence is strong." "What about the shop?" Caleb asked. He'd been avoiding this. The letter from the bank was still on the workbench, buried under Nettie's bread basket. $175. Past due. "I spoke to the bank manager this morning," Ward said. "Turns out Darius Cole held a significant stake in the Black Hollow Bank. With his assets frozen, the bank's board has agreed to forgive your debt as a gesture of goodwill." He allowed himself a thin smile. Goodwill and the desire to not be associated with a murderer. Caleb stared at him.
The debt's gone? The debt's gone. Caleb looked at the letter, at the number that had been crushing him for months. $175. Gone. Like it had never existed. Like the weight he'd been carrying had been cut loose and dropped into a river. The shop is yours, Ward said. Free and clear.
I don't need the shop, Caleb said. Everyone looked at him. I need the ranch. He looked at Emmy. If that's all right with you. Emmy looked back at him. Her good eye, the one that had measured every person who'd come near her since the night she fell through his door, measured him one more time.
It's your home too, she said. Papa wanted it that way.
They moved to the Cole Ranch 2 weeks later. Caleb's shoulder was still healing. His arm was still in the sling. He couldn't lift anything heavier than a coffee cup with his left hand. But he could walk. He could think. He could plan. And he could stand in the doorway of the ranch house that Samuel and Virginia Cole had built and feel something he hadn't felt in 7 years. Home. The house was exactly as Samuel had left it. Furniture in place, pictures on the walls, Virginia's china in the cabinet, Samuel's boots by the back door, still carrying dried mud from his last ride. Emmy walked through the rooms slowly, touching things. The kitchen table where they'd eaten breakfast, the chair where her father read at night, the windowsill where Copper the cat used to sleep.
Copper,
Emmy said suddenly. She turned to Caleb.
When I ran away, Copper was in the barn. The guards wouldn't let me take him.
We'll find him.
What if he's gone?
Then we'll find him anyway. They found Copper 2 days later. The orange cat had been living in the hayloft, surviving on mice and stubbornness. When Emmy called his name, he came down from the rafters like he'd been waiting for her, walked across the barn floor with the dignity of a creature who had never doubted his person would return, and climbed into her lap and stayed there. Emmy held him and buried her face in his fur and cried. The second time Caleb had seen her cry, both times from relief, both times holding something alive and warm that she'd been afraid she'd lost forever. Caleb hired ranch hands, good men, Morris Henderson, who'd gotten his land back and didn't need a job but wanted one anyway because he owed Samuel's memory a debt he planned to pay with work. 2 young cowboys from the territory, recommended by Briggs, who had quietly made it known that anyone who wanted to work the Cole Ranch would find the marshal personally invested in their good behavior. Nettie came out twice a week with Willie. She taught Emmy to cook, taught her to sew, taught her the things a girl needs to know that men can't teach, and some things they can but shouldn't try. Emmy soaked it up like dry ground taking rain. Willie taught Emmy to throw a rope properly. Emmy taught Willie to ride. They raced horses across the lower pasture, Biscuit running behind them, barking at everything, and the sound of children laughing carried across the valley like something the land had been waiting to hear. Caleb taught Emmy carpentry. Started with simple things, a birdhouse, a shelf for her room, a frame for the photograph of Samuel and Virginia that hung in the hallway. Emmy's hands were small but steady, and she had her father's patience. She measured twice, cut once, got frustrated when the joints didn't line up, got more frustrated when Caleb told her to sand it down and start again. "Papa never made me do things twice," she complained one afternoon in the barn they'd converted into a workshop. "Your papa was a horseman. I'm a woodman. Wood doesn't forgive sloppy joints." "Neither do horses." "Fair point. Sand it again." She sanded it again. The birdhouse turned out crooked. Emmy hung it on the porch anyway. A sparrow moved in within a week. "See," Emmy said, "the bird don't care if it's crooked." The bird has low standards. The bird has a home. That's what matters. Caleb looked at her. She looked back. And this time, she smiled. A real smile. Full and open and reaching all the way to both eyes, even the one that still carried a faint shadow of yellow from the bruise that had finally completely healed. It was the most beautiful thing Caleb had seen in 7 years. 6 months after the night Emmy fell through his door, Caleb rode up to the hill above Black Hollow. The cemetery sat on the ridge, looking out over the valley. Wildflowers had begun to push through the last of the snow. The air smelled like spring, like things growing, like the world deciding to try again. 2 graves, side by side. Ruth Dawson, Abigail Dawson. The stones he'd paid for with money he couldn't afford, carved with words he could barely see through his tears the day they were laid. Caleb dismounted, walked to the graves, took off his hat, stood there for a long time. "I met someone," he said. "Not to the stones, to Ruth, to Abigail, to wherever they were. Not like that. She's 8. Well, 9 now. Birthday was last month. Nettie made a cake. Willie gave her a fishing pole. I built her a bookshelf." He knelt down, touched Ruth's headstone with his right hand. The left was out of the sling now, but still weak. The crooked fingers rested against his knee. "Her name's Emmy. Samuel Cole's girl. You remember Samuel, Ruth? Big man, loud laugh. Couldn't tell a joke to save his life. His brother killed him for his ranch, for his horses, and then beat his little girl for 5 months because she wouldn't sign papers giving away everything her papa built." Caleb's throat tightened. He let it. Didn't fight it. "She knocked on my door in a blizzard, barefoot, bleeding, said 2 words and passed out in my arms. And something in me that I thought was dead, Ruth. Something I thought you and Abigail took with you when you left. It woke up." He looked at Abigail's stone. Small. Too small for the life it represented. "She ain't Abigail. I ain't trying to replace her. Nobody could replace her. Nobody could replace either of you. But Emmy needed somebody, and I was there. And Samuel asked me, and I said yes." He paused. "I said yes, Ruth. After 7 years of saying no to everything, I said yes." The wind moved through the grass. The wildflowers bent and straightened. "I stopped drinking. The night she came. Poured it out in the snow and haven't touched it since. 6 months. Longest I've been sober since you died. Longest I've been awake, really awake, in 7 years." He stood. His knees protested. His shoulder ached. His crooked fingers throbbed. 57 years old and feeling every one of them. "I couldn't save you," Caleb said. "I was 40 miles away, and I couldn't save you. And I've spent 7 years dying because of it. But I saved her. I saved Emmy. And I know that don't make up for what I lost. Don't balance the scales. Don't fix what's broken in me. But it's something. It's the first something I've had since you left." He put his hat back on, touched both stones one more time. "I'll keep coming," he said. "I'll bring Emmy sometime. She'd like this hill. She likes quiet places. She's a lot like Abigail that way." His voice cracked. "She'd like that too, knowing there was another little girl who liked the same things she liked." He walked back to his horse, mounted up, looked down at the graves one more time. "I love you both," he said. "Always will. But I'm done dying, Ruth. I'm done. It's time to live again. You'd want that for me. I know you would." He rode back to the ranch. The house was warm with lamplight. Smoke curled from the chimney. Through the window he could see Emmy at the kitchen table, working on arithmetic that Nettie assigned her twice a week. Copper sat on the table next to her book, paw occasionally batting at her pencil. Biscuit lay at her feet, tail wagging in his sleep.
Caleb unsaddled his horse, brushed him down, took his time, did the work with his hands, and let his mind be quiet.
When he came inside, Emmy looked up from her arithmetic. "Where'd you go?" "Up the hill." Emmy understood, didn't ask more, just nodded and went back to her numbers. The kind of respect for grief that only someone who'd carried their own grief could offer. Caleb sat down across from her, the kitchen table, the same one where Samuel and Virginia had sat, where Emmy had eaten breakfast with her parents every morning of her life until 5 months ago. Now Caleb sat where Samuel had sat, and Emmy sat where she'd always sat, and the chair where Virginia used to be stayed empty. Because some spaces aren't meant to be filled. They're meant to be honored. "I can't figure this one," Emmy said. She pushed the paper across the table. "Nettie says I have to show my work." Caleb looked at the problem. Long division. He'd never been good at it himself. "Ask Willie," he said. "Willie's worse at numbers than I am." "Ask Doc Crane." "Doc Crane told me to ask you." Caleb picked up the pencil, looked at the numbers, tried to remember how long division worked. Found that he couldn't. Tried again. Emmy watched him struggle with the expression of a child who has just discovered that adults don't know everything. "You can't do it either," she said. "I'm a carpenter. I measure things. I don't divide them." Emmy took the pencil back, stared at the problem, chewed on the eraser. "Papa could do it," she said quietly. "He could do numbers in his head. Mama used to say he could count a herd at a gallop." "Your papa was smarter than me." "Most people are." Caleb looked at her. She looked at him. Her mouth twitched. His mouth twitched. They both started laughing. Not big laughter. Not the kind that fills a room and shakes the walls. Small laughter. The kind that two people share when they've been through something terrible together and come out the other side, and found that the other side has arithmetic problems and bad coffee and a cat that won't stop sitting on the table. The kind of laughter that means we're okay. Not perfect, not healed, but okay. Emmy went back to her numbers. Caleb picked up the newspaper. Comfortable silence. The kind that exists between people who don't need to fill every moment with sound, because the presence itself is enough. Around 9 o'clock, Emmy closed her book. "I'm going to bed." "Sleep well." She stood, started toward the stairs, stopped, turned around. "Mr. Dawson?" "Yeah?" "I used to have nightmares every night. About Uncle Darius, about the quirt, about the sound his boots made coming down the hallway." She paused. "I haven't had one in 3 weeks." Caleb set down the newspaper. "That's good, Emmy." "I dream about Papa now sometimes, and Mama. Good dreams. Dreams where we're all at the table, and Papa's doing numbers in his head, and Mama's laughing at him." She looked at the empty chair. "And sometimes you're there too, at the table, with your crooked hand and your bad coffee, and it doesn't feel wrong. It feels like how it's supposed to be." Caleb's throat closed up. He couldn't speak, didn't trust himself to try. "Good night, Mr. Dawson." "Good night, Emmy." She went upstairs. He heard her moving around in her room, heard Copper meow as she picked him up, heard the bed creak as she lay down, heard the house settle into the specific quiet of a home with a child sleeping safely in it. Caleb stayed up a while longer, checked the locks, banked the fire, filled the water pitcher for morning, moved through the house doing the small tasks that keep a home safe and warm, the tasks of a man who had something worth protecting. He stopped at the front door, looked at the horseshoe he'd forged and hung above the frame last week. He and Emmy had made it together in the barn workshop. She'd held the tongs. He'd struck the metal with his good hand, the right one, while the left, with its crooked fingers, steadied the work. Together they'd shaped something strong from raw iron and heat and patience. Underneath it, carved into the wood in Emmy's careful handwriting,
were words they'd chosen together. Built on promise. Kept by love. Caleb touched the words with his fingertips. The wood was smooth under his scarred hands. He stepped outside, looked up at the stars. Same stars he'd looked at from his shop for 7 years. Same cold, distant, indifferent lights. But they looked different from here. From a porch attached to a home with a child sleeping upstairs, and a cat on her pillow, and a dog on the rug, and a life being built from the wreckage of 2 broken families. "Thank you, Samuel," Caleb said to the night, "for trusting a broken man with the most important thing in your world, for believing I could be more than what I'd become, for giving me a reason." The wind moved through the valley. The horses stirred in the barn. The creek that ran through the lower pasture made its steady sound, the sound of water moving forward, because that was what water did. It didn't stop. It didn't go back. It kept moving through whatever landscape it found, carving new paths when the old ones closed. Caleb went inside, closed the door, locked it. He climbed the stairs, past Emmy's room. The door was open a crack, the way she liked it now. Not closed and locked from inside like those first nights. Open, because she wasn't afraid anymore. Because she knew the man on the other side of that door would die before he let anything hurt her again. Through the gap he could see her sleeping, copper curled against her chest, one hand hanging off the bed, fingers slightly open, relaxed. The fingers of a child who wasn't bracing for anything, wasn't clenching, wasn't protecting herself, just sleeping. Caleb pulled the door closed to where she liked it, that exact gap. He knew the measurement by heart now. 3 inches. Enough to hear the house. Enough to feel safe. Enough to know she wasn't alone. He went to his room, Samuel and Virginia's room. He'd resisted it for the first month, slept in the spare room, felt wrong taking their bed, their space. But Emmy had asked him to. "This is your house now, too," she'd said. "Papa would want you in their room. He'd want someone in it who deserved it." Caleb sat on the edge of the bed, pulled off his boots, set them beside the door the way Samuel used to. The left boot always went first, the right boot second. A habit he'd picked up from the man whose home he now lived in, whose daughter he now raised, whose trust he carried like a weight and a gift at the same time. He looked at his hands in the lamplight. The right one, strong and capable, scarred from 20 years of carpentry and one desperate fight to save a child. The left one, broken and crooked, 2 fingers permanently bent, weakened further by a bullet that had been meant for Emmy. Both hands had done their work. Both hands had kept their promises. Caleb blew out the lamp, lay back in the darkness, pulled the quilt up. The quilt Virginia Cole had sewn. The bed Samuel Cole had slept in. The room that held the memory of a family that had trusted him with their most precious thing. Tomorrow he would wake to the sound of Emmy making coffee downstairs. Badly. Too weak. Too much sugar. But she was learning. He would come down, and she would hand him a cup, and he would drink it, and tell her it was getting better. Which was true.
And they would eat breakfast at the table with the empty chair, and the cat, and the dog, and the arithmetic book. And then they would go out and work the ranch and feed the horses, and fix whatever needed fixing, because there was always something that needed fixing on a 1,200-acre spread. And it would be ordinary. Completely ordinary. The kind of ordinary that Caleb Dawson had once had, and lost, and thought he'd never have again. The kind of ordinary that people only recognize as miraculous after it's been taken from them. He had it back. Different than before. Different people, different house, different life. But the same warmth. The same purpose. The same reason to set his boots by the door at night and reach for them again in the morning. Caleb Dawson closed his eyes. For the first time in 2,555 days,
He slept without dreaming of fire, without reaching for a bottle, without wishing the night would last forever, so he wouldn't have to face another empty morning.
He slept like a man who had kept every promise that mattered.